A very good morning to one and all. So from today, there will be 3 to 4 classes on optic nerve and its disorders. Am I audible to you all? If at all my voice is not clear, you can please message. Okay. So from today, we'll be starting neuro-ophthalmology. That is about the optic nerve and its various disorders. It will be taking some 3 to 4 classes. So let us see all the concepts in this one by one. Okay. 2 marks and 4 marks questions will be asked in your examinations, final exam from this chapter. Okay. So, before going to neuro-ophthalmology, a quick recap of your first year anatomy and physiology and basic sciences. Let us see how far you remember. Okay, so there are 12 pairs of cranial nerves. Okay, all of you might be thorough with this by now. So there are 12 pairs of cranial nerves. So the 13th cranial nerve. What is the 13th cranial nerve? If they ask in your PG entrance examination, it is known as nervi terminalis or nerve 0 or nerve N. So there are usually 12 pairs of cranial nerves. Olfactory, optic, oculomotor, trochlear, all these things, you know the names. There is a 13th pair of cranial nerve called nervi terminalis, which has been found in some lower animals. In humans, its function is not yet known. Even in lower animals, its function is not exactly known, but it is still under research. But if at all they ask a question, what is the 13th pair of cranial nerve, you can go for nervi terminalis. Some say that it serves the function of olfaction, but it is still under research. Okay. Next, what is the 14th pair of cranial nerve if they ask? So actually the 7th cranial nerve, that is your facial nerve, it has got a sensory root which is called a nerve of Wisberg or nervus intermedius, that is sometimes referred to as 14th cranial nerve. This is only for knowledge purpose. Actually there are 12 pairs of cranial nerves, but if at all anywhere they ask you what is the 13th pair, you say it is nervi terminalis. What is the 14th one? You can say nervus intermedius or nerve of Wisberg, which is nothing but the sensory root of the 7th cranial nerve, sensory and parasympathetic root of the facial nerve. Okay. Next, what are the parasympathetic system consist of? So the parasympathetic outflow is also known as the craniosacral outflow. So craniosacral outflow. Cranial, it means the cranial nerves 3, 7, 9 and 10, and sacral outflow consists of S2, S3 and S4 segments. Okay, that is the parasympathetic system. And sympathetic system is thoracolumbar outflow, that is from T1 to L2. There is a separate chain, a sympathetic chain which is present at the side of the vertebral column, which is known as a sympathetic chain. From that, the sympathetic outflow occurs from T1 to L2 segment. So these basics you have to remember. There are 12 pairs of cranial nerves. We'll be dealing about the second one, that is the optic nerve today. And then there is a parasympathetic system, which is a craniosacral outflow. It consists of cranial nerves 3, 7, 9 and 10. This 3 is very important for this ophthalmology part, and the 7 is for your ENT part, and S2, S3, S4 is for your general surgery and your gynec and orthopedics and all. And sympathetic system is T1 to L2, which is also important for our ophthalmological point of view. Okay. So diagrammatic representation. So here you all might have be familiar by now. Parasympathetic system is rest and digest. Okay. And sympathetic system is fight or flight. Okay. So what does this do? This parasympathetic nerve, it causes contraction of bladder and it causes constriction of pupil. As far as ophthalmology part is concerned, you remember that parasympathetic causes constriction of pupil, sympathetic causes dilatation of pupil. So parasympathetic system is rest and digest, which causes pupillary constriction. Sympathetic system is fight and flight, that is in acute emergency it comes into action, and it causes dilatation of the pupil. For ophthalmology, this much you remember. The rest of the things will be taught for you in the next year. Okay. So constriction of pupil is by parasympathetic. Dilatation of pupil is by sympathetic. That thing you have to remember by now. Parasympathetic is by cranial nerves 3, 7, 9 and 10, S2, S3, S4. Sympathetic is by T1 to L2. So that concept you should be clear. Parasympathetic is constriction of pupil and sympathetic system is dilatation of the pupil. Any doubts are there, you can ask in between, okay, in the chat box. Next, coming to visual pathway. So this might be a 4 marks question for you in your exam. They'll ask you to describe the visual pathway with the help of a neat labeled diagram. So how do you do? So basically the light, visual pathway is how the light travels in our body. So the light initially falls on the retina, that is from the cornea, lens and vitreous it travels, and light falls on the retina. From retina it goes to the optic nerve. From there to the optic chiasma, optic tract, lateral geniculate body, optic radiations and occipital cortex. So this is the visual pathway. We'll see in a diagrammatic part. So see, the rays of light will fall on the retina. From retina they go to the optic nerve. From optic nerve, they go to the optic chiasma. From there, they go to the optic tract. From there to lateral geniculate body. From there, optic radiation. And from there, they come to the occipital cortex. Occipital cortex, area 17 and 18 and 19, they are concerned with vision. Okay. So, as the same diagram another way. So, the light falls on the retina. From the retina, it goes to the optic nerve. From there to the optic chiasma. From there to the optic tract. From there to lateral geniculate body. From there, optic radiation. And finally to the occipital cortex. So, this is the visual pathway. And here you remember, the nasal fibers of the retina always decussate or cross over to the opposite side. So, here you see, this red color is the nasal fiber in this right eye. Okay. So see what it is doing. It is getting crossed over in this optic chiasm and coming to the opposite side. Similarly, the yellow color of this part of eye, suppose you think it to be the left eye, this is again crossing over and going to the other hemisphere. So what you have to remember is, in the optic pathway, after passing to the optic nerve, the nasal fibers of the retina cross over to the opposite side in the optic chiasm and they go into the optic tract. So that is an important point which you have to remember. Okay. Now, a recap of retina lesson. So what are the various layers of retina? This is the outer part, that is sclera, choroid, and then there comes retina. So outside there is retinal pigment epithelium followed by layers of rods and cones or photoreceptor layer. Next there is an outer limiting membrane or external limiting membrane. Outer nuclear layer, that is the nuclei of the rods and cone cells. Next outer plexiform layer, inner nuclear layer, inner plexiform layer, ganglion cell layer, and nerve fiber layer. Okay, so these are the various structures. Now this ganglion cell layer is the one which forms your optic nerve. So why the layers of retina are important in this context is, out of these 10 layers of retina, this 8th layer, that is the ganglion cell layer which is present, this ultimately forms, the axons of this ganglion cells form the nerve fiber layer. This nerve fiber layer finally culminates into the optic nerve. So the ganglion cell layer, the axons of these cells form the nerve fiber layer. This nerve fiber layer ultimately forms the optic nerve. That is why these layers are very important. Okay. So what is this optic nerve? So I have already told you, it is the axons of these ganglion cells. The axons of the ganglion cells form into a nerve fiber layer and thereby they form the optic nerve. Okay. So this optic nerve is the second pair of cranial nerve. This is the second pair of cranial nerve which is formed by axons of the ganglion cells of the retina. Retinal ganglion cells. It extends from the optic disc up to the optic chiasma. What is this optic disc? What is optic chiasma? We will see in detail. So there are usually 1 million axons in each optic nerve. 1 million is 10 lakhs. Okay. So in each optic nerve, there are 1 million axons. So combined put together, in a human body, how many axons are there in optic nerve? The answer will be 2 millions. If in each optic nerve, how many are there? Then the answer will be 1 million. So 1 million axons are present in each optic nerve. Next, the diameter of this optic nerve is 2 to 10 microns. And there is no neurilemma. So neurilemma you all might have known by now. So what is neurilemma? The sheath which covers the optic nerve. So there is no neurilemma of this optic nerve. So there is no regeneration if there is any trauma. So in your physiology classes, you might have already studied about the regeneration of the neurons. Suppose a neuron is cut. There is an orthograde degeneration and a retrograde degeneration and followed by regeneration of the nerve. So if the nerve sheath is intact, the materials, mitochondria and all pass on to the proximal segment and thereby they help in regeneration. If there is no neurilemma, there is no regeneration. So in optic nerve, as there is no neurilemma, that is the no myelin sheath, as it is unmyelinated, hence there is no regeneration. Okay. And next, one more thing from your basics. In your first year anatomy, you might have learned the terms tract, ganglion, nucleus, and nerve. So what are these? So a collection of cytons. So in a neuron, there are two parts, the cell body and the axon. The cell body is also known as the cyton. Any neuron has got two parts. One is the cell body, the other is the axon, to be brief. The cell body is also known as cyton. Okay, a collection of cytons in the central nervous system is called nucleus. That is a nucleus of gracilis, nucleus of cuneatus, and any other nucleus what you take, ventroposterolateral nucleus in thalamus. So any nucleus in your brain is an aggregation of cell bodies or cytons, whereas any aggregation of axons in the central nervous system is known as a tract. Your tract of Gall, tract of Bordak, and lateral lemniscus, medial lemniscus, all these things you might have learned in your anatomy. Vestibulospinal tract, vestibulocerebellar tract, next lateral spinothalamic tract, and all these things which carries pain sensations, pressure sensations, temperature, and all these things. Okay. So coming to central nervous system. Central nervous system comprises of brain and spinal cord. So in this central nervous system, a collection of cytons is called nucleus, like your olivatory nucleus, superior salivatory nucleus, trigeminal nucleus, etc. And a collection of axons is called tract. So tract is your like lateral spinothalamic tract or dorsolumbar columns, tract of gracilis, tract of cuneatus, etc. Okay. And in the peripheral nervous system consists of your peripheral nerves. Okay, that is like your radial nerve or whatever it may be. Okay, so this in here in this peripheral nervous system, what we call an aggregation of cytons is called a ganglion. So ganglion you might have learned in your first year anatomy. The thoracolumbar outflow, the sympathetic chain is nothing but an aggregation of ganglion. Similarly, you have got the stellate ganglion in your neck, in the cervix part, that is in your neck, you have got the stellate ganglion. So all these things. So in your peripheral nervous system, a collection of cytons is called ganglion, and a collection of axons is called nerve. Strictly speaking, optic nerve is a nerve, they say usually, but usually it is a tract because it is embryologically, it is thought to be a derivative of the brain. Optic nerve, though we call it as a nerve, it should be strictly called a tract because it is an extension of the central nervous system. So there is always a debate whether to call the optic nerve an optic nerve or a tract, but usually we call it by the term nerve. So usually you follow that it is a nerve. Okay. So what are the parts of the optic nerve? The length of the optic nerve is approximately 47 to 50 millimeters. That is 4.7 to 5 centimeters. That is the length. These values are important for your entrance purpose. Okay. So the length of the optic nerve is approximately 4.7 to 5 centimeters. It has got 4 parts: intraocular, intraorbital, intracanalicular, and intracranial. So the intraocular part is 1 millimeter in length. Intraorbital is 30 millimeters in length. Intracanalicular is 6 to 9 millimeters in length. And intracranial is 10 millimeters in length. These are all things you have to mark up. There is no other way. So here you see diagrammatic representation. So optic nerve is divided into 4 parts. First part is intraocular part, that is this one, which is 1 millimeter in length. Next comes your intraorbital part, which is the longest one, 30 millimeter in length. Next comes the intracanalicular part, which is the 6 millimeter. And next the intracranial part, which is the 10 millimeters in length. Okay. This intracanalicular, why it is called intracanalicular? Because it is present inside the optic canal. Optic canal is present between the greater wing and lesser wing of sphenoid. It is an exit with the orbital apex. Okay. So what are the applied aspects of various parts of optic nerve? So coming to intraocular part. So intraocular part is this one. This is your intraocular part. So what are the things, what are the applied aspects in this intraocular part? Basically, glaucoma chapter is already over. So you might have been, you should tell me about this ISNT rule by now. So inferior, superior, nasal and temporal. So inferior is the thickest and temporal is the thinnest. So this inferior field or the inferior part of the optic nerve is the first one to get damaged in glaucoma. So when the inferior part is gone, as the inferior part receives light rays from the superior aspect, so the superior visual field defects are the most common. This was asked in your NEET entrance in the last year. So basically optic nerve has got this intraocular part. The applied aspect of this intraocular part is we assess glaucoma changes from this intraocular part. So in glaucoma test changes, you have to remember the ISNT rule: inferior, superior, nasal and temporal, which means inferior is the thickest and temporal is the thinnest. In glaucoma, when the intraocular pressure is raised or due to any cause, when there is a damage to the optic nerve, the inferior fibers are the first ones to be affected. So the inferior fibers are first one to be lost. So here you have to remember that the inferior fibers receive light from the superior half of the visual field, whereas the superior half of the retina receives light from the inferior half of the visual field. So as the inferior fibers are first affected, there is a superior visual field defect is the first one to occur. Okay. So here you see, so this is the intraocular part of the optic nerve head. So now what happens is, usually when the rays of light are falling on this retina, okay, so what happens is the superior rays of light, so whatever the light rays are coming from superior part, they fall on this inferior part of retina and inferior part of optic disc. So whatever light rays are coming from the inferior aspect, they fall on this superior part of this retina. Similarly, you have seen that nasal and temporal. The nasal part of the light which is falling, that falls on the temporal part of retina. Similarly, the temporal part of light of visual field falls on the nasal part of retina. It is little confusing. We'll see it in detail in the further visual pathway section. Okay. Just for now, you remember that superior half of the retina sees the inferior visual field. Inferior half of retina sees the superior visual field. Next, the nasal half of retina sees the temporal visual field, and temporal half of retina sees the nasal visual field. Everything is opposite. Okay, that much you remember. What is that in clarity we will see in the subsequent slides. So this is the optic nerve head or the intraocular part. So similarly, one more thing regarding the arrangement, fibers from the center of the retina are placed in the center of the optic nerve, whereas the nerve fibers from the periphery of the retina. So in the periphery of the retina are placed in the peripheral part of the optic nerve. So that is how they are arranged. Okay. See the retina, the macula lutea is present at the center. In this diagram, if you see, this is the center part of retina, which is called the macula lutea. This is the peripheral, superiotemporal part, inferotemporal part, superior-nasal and infranasal part. So here this macula is the central part of retina. So how the fibers are arranged in your optic nerve is that the nerve fibers coming from the center of the retina, that is from the macula, are present in the center of the optic nerve. Whereas the nerve fibers which are coming from the superiotemporal aspect, inferotemporal aspect, superior-nasal and infranasal fibers are present in the respective periphery. So that is what you have to remember. So the central fibers are present in the central part of the optic nerve. The peripheral fibers are placed in the peripheral fibers of the optic nerve. So why this is important? Because suppose there is some accident and the person got an injury of only this part. Then as the superiotemporal retina is gone, only his infranasal visual field will be lost. So for localizing the lesion, this arrangement of nerve fibers is very important. Because if suppose the patient has a central visual field defect, suppose there is a loss of central vision and the peripheral vision is good, that means you should look for a pathology in his retina. So that is why it is important to know about the arrangement of the nerve fibers. Okay. Next. So what I was telling you about is glaucoma inferior superior nasal. So this is an advanced glaucomatous disc. Already you might have seen this. So here you see, this is the neuroretinal rim, NRR. Now it is thinned out. You see this is the physiological cup. This is the optic disc. So this physiological cup has increased in size, or it has engorged in size. So they were pushing the vessels to the periphery. So first there is inferior polar notching or inferior neuroretinal rim thinning, followed by superior, followed by nasal, followed by temporal. That is the ISNT rule. Here the inferior rim is thinned out, vessels are pushed to the periphery, and here you can see the bending of the vessels here, and there is also peripapillary atrophy. So this is an advanced glaucomatous disc. Whereas this is a normal disc. Here you see the neuroretinal rim is healthy. It is very thick. Compared to here, you see how thin it is. Here the cup is very small, physiological cup. Here the physiological cup is very large. So this is an advanced glaucomatous disc, which can be diagnosed based on the appearance of the intraocular part of optic nerve. Okay. So that was about the intraocular part. Next we'll come to the intraorbital part. So intraorbital part is 25 millimeters in length. It extends from the eyeball up to the orbital apex. It takes a curved path to allow for the movement of the globe. It is surrounded by all three layers of meninges, and the superior and medial rectus are adherent to its sheath and causes pain in retrobulbar neuritis. Okay. So what is this? We will see. So basically, this is the intraorbital part. So this is roughly 30 millimeters in length. So now the most important thing you have to remember is, you see it is slightly curved. It is not straight. It has got an S-shaped curve. Why this S-shaped curve? Because when the eyeball is not fixed, eyeball always keeps on moving. When the eyeball is looking towards this side, this gets elongated. Similarly, when the eyeball is looking towards this side, this one becomes folded. So just like your uterine artery or your facial artery or your splenic artery, as similarly, this optic nerve is also follows a sinus path. That is to allow for the free movement of the eyeball. So in your facial artery, what happens as your mandible, your jaw is opened and closed, the artery should not get stretched. That's why it follows a tortuous course. Similarly, your uterine arteries in pregnancy, uterus enlarges. So to compensate for that, even your uterine artery is very curved and tortuous. So is the case with your splenic artery to compensate for the movements of the abdomen during respiration. So similarly, this optic nerve has a curved pathway. This curved path is because when the eyeball is rotating this side and that side, so when the eyeball is rotating towards the temporal aspect, it gets stretched. And when the eyeball is rotating towards the nasal aspect, it becomes loose and curved. So that is why this optic nerve follows a sinus path. Okay. So that part you remember, it is enough. Applied aspect for you. And similarly, in retrobulbar neuritis, it is a condition which we'll be dealing subsequently. In retrobulbar neuritis, there is pain with ocular movements. Why? Because the superior rectus and medial rectus muscle, I told you about this in your squint class also, if you remember. The superior and medial rectus muscle fibers are attached to the meningeal sheaths of this optic nerve. And whenever there is an inflammation of this optic nerve sheath, that is retrobulbar neuritis. Retrobulbar is retrobulbar. Retro means behind the globe, behind the bulb. That is behind the optic, behind the eyeball. When there is a neuritis, when there is an inflammation of the optic nerve, that inflammation spreads to the superior and medial rectus muscle because some fibers of these muscles are attached to the optic nerve. That's why in retrobulbar neuritis, whenever there is a movement of the eyeball, there is some amount of pain. Next, intracanalicular part. So this intracanalicular part, the periaxial system of vessels supply blood to this. So this is here you can see this is the periaxial system of blood vessels or the spiral plexus, which is supplying to this optic nerve. From this pia mater, there is some blood vessels which supply to this optic nerve. So if this pia mater is stripped off during any surgery, the optic nerve will lose its blood supply. So whenever you are going for any orbital surgeries, like any orbital decompression or for thyroid or orbital tumors or orbital hematoma evacuation after trauma or orbital fractures, whenever you are doing, you have to be very careful to not to strip the dural sheath or meningeal sheaths of this optic nerve. Because once you strip off those sheaths accidentally during your surgery, what happens is the spiral plexus blood supply is lost to the optic nerve, and so the optic nerve goes into necrosis. So that you have to be very careful during the surgery. That is an applied aspect of this intracanalicular part. And one more thing is, in this intracanalicular part, what happens is the dura mater is very tightly attached to the bony wall. So here you see this is the bone, suppose you think this is a cut section. So to the bony wall, this dura mater is tightly attached. So whenever there is a trauma, suppose there is a road traffic accident or a high speed injury, so whenever there is a rapid movement of this orbit, this dura mater, as it is tightly attached, it may get stripped off from this bony wall, and thereby this optic nerve is more prone for avulsion in this optic foramen part or intracanalicular part. Okay, that is the applied aspect. And one more thing is ophthalmic artery crosses obliquely over it from infralateral side. That is not of much importance. And lamina papyracea separates it from the sphenoid and posterior ethmoid sinuses, and that's why paranasal sinus infection can cause retrobulbar neuritis. Okay, so here you see. So this is the sphenoid sinus, paranasal sinuses. So what happens is, up to here the orbit will be present. The orbit will be present somewhere over here. So what happens is lamina papyracea is a thin sheet of bone which separates these sinuses, this sphenoid sinus and posterior ethmoidal sinus, from this orbit. So whenever there is a retrobulbar PNS infection, it spreads into the orbit. It can cause retrobulbar neuritis. Okay. So intracanalicular part, the lamina papyracea separates it from the sphenoid and posterior ethmoid sinuses. So infections of paranasal sinuses can erode into the orbit and cause retrobulbar neuritis. So intracranial part, it is 10 millimeter in length and it lies above the cavernous sinus. So this is the cavernous sinus. You might have read about it in detail in your first year anatomy. So in its lateral wall, there are the third cranial nerve and the trigeminal nerve and the fourth cranial nerve and the sixth cranial. And here the sixth cranial nerve is present beneath the internal carotid artery. That is not of much importance for you. It is only for PG level. They won't ask you. And this is one interesting case which I have seen during my PG. So this was a patient who presented with ptosis. Last class I have been telling you about ptosis. So there was ptosis in this patient. There was drooping of the upper eyelid, followed by restriction of extraocular movements. In my squint classes, I showed you one diagram of a paralytic squint case. So that case is MRI film is here, CT angiogram film is here. So there was a patient, roughly 40-year-old male patient. So he presented with ptosis. There was drooping of the upper eyelid, and there was restriction of the extraocular movements, and there was epistaxis, bleeding from his nose. So and he also complained of headache, and he was a known case of hypertension and diabetic. So a 50-year male, known case of diabetes and hypertension. He came with drooping of the upper eyelid associated with epistaxis, bleeding from the nose, and restriction of extraocular movements, that is paralytic squint, and he complained of headache. So when we went on evaluating, and finally we got a suspicion, we made a CT angiogram. So in a CT angiogram, here you can see there is a large aneurysm. So this is an aneurysm of the internal carotid artery. So you can see this red one is the internal carotid artery, which is present in the intracavernous part, that is in the cavernous sinus. So there was a large aneurysm, roughly 15 to 25 millimeter aneurysm, arising from this intracavernous part of internal carotid artery, which was eroding into the sphenoid sinus. So in this patient, there was a large aneurysm of this internal carotid artery, which is pressing upon this oculomotor nerve, trochlear nerve, and sixth nerve, thereby causing restriction of ocular movements and ptosis. And this aneurysm was also eroding into the sphenoid sinus, which was causing bleeding into the nose and causing epistaxis. So that was the reason why this patient had got a ptosis followed by epistaxis. So this is the frontal or your coronal view. If you see here, there is an aneurysm you can see, and here it is more clear in the cross section. That is in the sagittal plane. If you see the large aneurysm which is present in the intracavernous part of internal carotid artery. So it is pressing all those nerves, third, fourth, and sixth cranial nerves. It was compressing them, causing ptosis, restriction of extraocular movements. It was also eroding into the sphenoid sinus, which was causing epistaxis or nasal bleeding. This is a three-dimensional imposition of the skull over the CT angiogram. Okay. Next. So what is an optic chiasma? So that was about the optic nerve with some applied aspects. So next, what is optic chiasma? It is a flat structure. It is 12 millimeters into 8 millimeters in length. So there is some question. It also looks like a tumor. Can't it be optic? No, it was not a tumor. So why? Because we evaluated it. Initially, we went for an MRI. Plain MRI I did first of all. In plain MRI, it showed a void lesion and that was arising from the vascular blood vessel. It could be a tumor also, but finally when we did an angiogram, that's why it was a CT angiogram film. If it was an MRI, we could have doubted whether it is a, only if it is a plain MRI, we can't say whether it is a vascular tumor or a vascular lesion. But even in plain MRI also, we can say something from that. But when we, that's why we went for a CT angiogram, but it looked like a vascular lesion in plain MRI. So that's why we went for CT angiogram, which is a gold standard for this imaging of this cranial, of this arteries. So in CT angiogram, it was clearly filling. That lesion was filling with the dye which we injected. So here you can see this is all the dye which was reflecting. So that's why it was diagnosed as an aneurysm. So by neuroimaging, you can diagnose all these things. Okay. So next, coming to optic chiasma, it is 12 millimeters horizontal and 8 millimeter. So horizontal and anteroposterior diameter. So I told you the nasal fibers from the retina decussate or cross over to the opposite side. So I told you in the first diagram, if you remember, the visual pathway, the nasal fibers from the retina cross over to the opposite side, whereas the temporal fibers remain in the same side. And there is a thing called junctional scotoma and a von Willebrand's knee. What is this? We will see in this diagram. Like this, if I say, you can't understand. So basically, you have to know the relations of this optic chiasma. So this optic chiasma is a flat and a horizontal structure, which is 12 millimeter in length and 8 millimeter in width. It lies over the pituitary gland. So this is the sella turcica, a bony space in which there is a pituitary gland. This pituitary gland, this is the hypophysis filter, this hypophysis stalk of the pituitary gland. This is the diaphragma cella, the covering present over the pituitary gland. And over this lies your optic chiasma, over this diaphragma cella. It is bounded anteriorly by this anterior clinoid process and posteriorly by the posterior clinoid process. Okay, and this optic nerve comes and joins this optic chiasma. From this optic chiasma, optic tract arises. So now, for your level, what you have to remember is, see, this is the nasal fiber. So here you can see this green color is the inferonasal fiber, brown color is the superionasal fiber, and next coming to this red color and this orange color. So these are the temporal fibers. Okay. So here what you see, what you have to remember is the nasal fibers of this retina. So this is the optic nerve. So I told you the arrangement of nerve fibers in the optic nerve. The fibers coming from the macula are present in the center. The fibers coming from the periphery, that is inferotemporal, superiotemporal, inferonasal and superionasal are present in the peripheries. So that part is clear for you. See, now these macular fibers travel at the center of this optic nerve and they divide into both sides. So the central macular fibers, or the fibers coming from the macula lutea or your fovea centralis, they have got a bilateral innervation, just like your Bell's palsy in your 7th cranial nerve. So these have got a bilateral innervation. So the macular fibers, they travel into both the optic tracts and they go to the brain. So the macula has got a bilateral representation. That is point number 1. Second point is the nasal fibers always decussate towards the opposite side. Okay. See this green color and this brown color. These two are nasal fibers coming from this retina. So these fibers cross over to the opposite side optic tract. That point you have to remember. And these temporal fibers, that is this red color and this yellow color, these two things do not cross over. They remain on the same side. So the concepts what you have to know here is the nasal fibers of the retina decussate towards the opposite side. Temporal fibers remain to the same side. And the macula has got a bilateral representation. So these three things you have to be clear here. And one more thing in your PG entrance, what they will ask is von Willebrand's knee. What is this von Willebrand's knee? So here you have to remember that this inferonasal fibers, so this green color here you see, this inferonasal fibers, they do not only just cross over to the opposite side. In this optic chiasma, they cross over to the opposite side. Along with that, they also take a bend into the other optic nerve. Here you see the superionasal fibers, this brown color you see, it is directly coming into this optic tract. Whereas this inferonasal fibers, what it is happening here is, they are coming up to here, they are crossing towards the nasal side. They are going into the opposite side optic nerve also. And again, they are coming back and going into the optic tract. Okay. So whenever suppose there is some accident or there is some surgery and you injure the optic chiasma, optic nerve at this part, that is this von Willebrand's knee, then you get a type of a visual field defect which is called a junctional scotoma. So this junctional scotoma is seen in case of damages in von Willebrand's knee. So in your PG entrance, they will be asking you when lesion of which part of this visual pathway is this junctional scotoma seen. Then your answer will be von Willebrand's knee. So why it is called a junctional scotoma? Because the fibers from this optic nerve, while they are nasal fibers, they not only just cross over to the opposite side, but they also take a bend into the opposite side optic nerve. And from this bend, again, they travel back and come back to the optic tract. So whenever there is a lesion here in this von Willebrand's knee, it produces a typical type of scotoma, which is known as a junctional scotoma. Okay. So junctional scotoma is seen in case of von Willebrand syndrome. So how that scotoma appears and all we'll see in subsequent slides. And this is about the blood supply. So here you see this is the middle cerebral artery. Suppose this is the internal carotid artery. Suppose there's an internal carotid artery aneurysm. So it can compress this optic chiasm. Similarly, there is an anterocommunicating artery, an aneurysm or a tumor, and this can also compress this optic chiasm. So these can be cause of some of the visual field defects. Okay, they are more important for neurosurgical part. So this is a junctional scotoma. See, whatever this white color is, what you are seeing, and this black one is blind. So suppose for a normal person like you and me, what will happen is whenever we do this visual field charting, there's a thing called visual fields, Humphreys visual field, and all they might have been dealt with you clearly in your glaucoma chapters. So for any glaucoma or else as for neuro-ophthalmology, the most important investigation is the visual fields. Let it be glaucoma or let it be neuro-ophthalmology case, you have to go for a visual field. In this visual field, a visual field is nothing but a hill of vision or an island of vision surrounded by a sea of darkness by Irakbar. So it is an island of vision surrounded by a sea of darkness. So when you plot a visual field charting or when you do a visual field charting, what happens is, you whatever this white part is the part which you are able to see. This black one is the blind area which you are not able to see. Okay. So in neuro-ophthalmology and glaucoma, you have to go for visual field charting. In visual field charting, you get a report something like this. In that, whatever is white is which one the patient is able to see. Whatever is black is the patient which is not able to see. So in case of a junctional scotoma, what happens is, in case of a von Willebrand's, suppose at that part it is affected, that one eye, there is complete loss of vision because the optic nerve is completely gone. In the other eye, there is only a superiotemporal defect because infranasal fibers are crossed. So here you see, suppose we cut this optic nerve here, this eye becomes completely blind. So that is your eye here. So this one, that eye is completely blind. And next thing what happens is, when you are cutting here, the infranasal fibers of the other eye are also being cut here at this place. So this infranasal fibers subserve the superiotemporal visual field. So that part you remember. So infranasal subserve the superiotemporal visual field. That's why you get a superiotemporal scotoma here. So superiotemporal scotoma in the other eye and total blindness in that same eye. So this is a junctional scotoma which is seen in case of von Willebrand's knee if at all it is injured. Okay. Next, coming to optic tract. So what is an optic tract? It is the continuation of the optic chiasm. It goes up to lateral geniculate body. It has temporal fibers of same retina and nasal fibers of the optic retina. And the important part here is the pupillary fibers. So the pupillary reflexes, they form a structure called superior brachium. So the optic tract, what happens is, the pupillary fibers, they form a structure on the superior brachium, so which leave the optic tract and they go out and relay into the pretectal nucleus. So there is a nucleus called pretectal nucleus present in the midbrain. So pretectal nucleus is the center for pupillary right reflex, direct reflex, consensual reflex, all you might have learned in your first year physiology. So from this pretectal nucleus forms the center for the pupillary right reflex. And the pupillary fibers, they come from the optic nerve, and in the optic tract, they form a separate structure called superior brachium, and they exit the optic tract and they go to the pretectal nucleus. Okay. So the optic tract has got two types of fibers. One is the optic nerve fibers which go to the lateral geniculate body. The other one is the pupillary fibers which form a superior brachium and go to the pretectal nucleus. So lateral geniculate body is an oval structure. It consists of the posterior ends of optic tract. It has got 6 layers of neurons. So it has got 6 layers of neurons. 2, 3, 5 comprise of the same side, that is temporal retina uncrossed fibers, whereas 1/4 is come from the contralateral side. So this is for PG purpose of you. It is not of much importance for you. Just should remember that lateral geniculate body has got 6 layers. So 6 layers, that is enough for you. You need not go into further details. And optic radiations. From this lateral geniculate body up to the occipital cortex, you have got this optic radiations. It is also known as the geniculocalcarine pathway. Genicular because it arises from the lateral geniculate body. Calcarine because the optic occipital cortex subserving the visual function is located beneath the calcarine fissure. That's why it is called geniculocalcarine pathway. And similarly, the upper fibers process the lower visual field, which pass to the parietal lobe and cause pie in the floor. And the inferior fibers cause the upper visual field, that is temporal lobe, pie in the sky. What is this? We will be dealing later on. Similarly, visual cortex. In visual cortex, it is present in the medial aspect of the occipital lobe. Area 17, 18, and 19. Area 17 is striate cortex, 18 is called peristriate, and area 19 is called parastriate cortex. They are located above and below the calcarine fissure in your occipital lobe. Okay. So this is your occipital lobe. This is the calcarine fissure. This black line. So above and below this calcarine fissure, these areas are located. Area 17, 18, and 19. Okay, blood supply of visual pathway, I told you pyometer or pial plexus in the intracanalicular part and intraorbital part. And also from some part, intraorbital part has also got some supply from the central retinal artery. Okay, these are the pial plexus which supply from the periphery, and this is the central retinal artery which supplies some part of the intraocular and intraorbital part. That is about the blood supply in brief. And this is about the blood circulation of the cerebral hemisphere. So this is a useful mnemonic which you have to remember, because when you go for general medicine next year, so you will be having a long case of CVA, cerebrovascular accident. So for cerebrovascular accident, the patient will be presenting with hemiplegia, that is the opposite side, upper limb and lower limb will be having weakness. Already you might have seen it in your general medicine wards also. So in hemiplegia, usually the lesion is present at the level of internal capsule or present at the level of occipital cortex or cerebral cortex or parietal cortex that you have to localize. So for that you have to know the blood supply. So blood supply, there is a mnemonic. See, you see there is a posterior cerebral artery, and there is a middle cerebral artery, and also there is a anterior cerebral artery. So which artery supplies which part of the occipital lobe, which part of the cerebral hemispheres, there is a mnemonic. So this M sum T, you remember this mnemonic. This is useful not only for this ophthalm but also for your general medicine. So SAMPA, this is a mnemonic. So middle cerebral artery supplies the superolateral aspect of the cerebrum. Okay. So when you see, suppose this is the cerebral hemispheric footage, superolateral part S. Superolateral part is supplied by the middle cerebral artery, MS. Next, anterior cerebral artery supplies the medial part of the cerebrum. So the medial cerebrum hemisphere is supplied by the anterior cerebral artery. And similarly, the posterior cerebral artery supplies the inferior part of the cerebral hemisphere. So if you take this is the cerebral hemisphere, it has got a superolateral surface and inferior surface and a medial surface. So M something, middle cerebral artery supplies the superolateral artery, anterior cerebral artery supplies the medial part of cerebrum, and posterior cerebral artery supplies the inferior cerebrum. So this is what you have to remember. Okay, SAMPA, that you remember. Next, what are the orders of neurons? This is one more important concept. In ENT or ophthalmology or whatever subject you go, there is an order of neuron. So in ophthalmology, the first order of neurons is the bipolar cells. The second order neuron is the ganglion cells. Third order neurons is the optic radiations from lateral geniculate body. Okay. So if we go for a diagrammatic representation. So here you see. So when you see here, this is the bipolar cell layer, it is given here. So this bipolar cell layer is the first order neuron. So here what happens is, in any special senses, there is a sensory end organ. So the sensory end organ here is the eyeball, and in eyeball specifically, this rods and cones are the sensory end organ. After the sensory end organ, the neural pathway starts. So the first order neuron here is the bipolar cells. Bipolar cells form the first order neuron, and then this ganglion cell layer form the second order neuron. Okay. So here you see the first order neurons, they are the bipolar cells. They synapse with the ganglion cells of the retina. So from this ganglion cells, second order neurons arise and they pass on out as optic nerve neurons and they come up to the lateral geniculate body. So first order neuron is bipolar cells. Second order neurons is from optic nerve up to lateral geniculate body. Third order neuron is this geniculocalcarine pathway or optic radiation, that is from lateral geniculate body up to the visual cortex. This is called third order neurons. So this part you have to remember. Okay. First order is the bipolar cells. First order is the bipolar cells in the retina. Second order is the ganglion cell layer up to the lateral geniculate body. Third order is the optic radiation from lateral geniculate body going up to this occipital cortex. So that is what you have to remember. And one more thing, important concept here is, so now here you see in this diagram. So this is the left eye and this is the right eye. Okay. So this side what is present, that is the right eye, and this is the left eye. Now here if you suppose you bisect here, so what happens is, in your right eye if you see, this is the right side of the patient and this is the right eye. So here what you are observing is the rays of light coming from this temporal aspect are falling on the nasal retina. Okay, this is very important concept because without this you can't understand visual field defects. So pay a little concentration for this. So this is the right eye of the patient and this is the left eye of the patient. I hope you are all able to see my mouse cursor or pointer. Okay, so this is the right eye, this is the left eye, this is the temporal aspect, and this is the nasal. So here the nose is present here. So this is the temporal part, this is the nasal part. This is the right eye, this is the left eye. So now what happens here is, when the patient is looking straight, the rays of light which are coming from this temporal aspect, from this side, the rays of light come and fall here in this nasal retina. Because generally the rays of light follows a straight path. So any rays of light which are coming from this side, that is from the temporal part, they fall on the nasal retina. And whatever the rays of light that are coming from this nasal part of retina, they fall on the temporal retina. Okay. So be very clear in this diagram. This is the right eye and this is the left eye. This is the temporal aspect of the patient. This is the nasal aspect of the patient. Okay. So when the patient is looking straight ahead, or whenever the patient is looking in visual field, what happens is the rays of light which are coming from the temporal half of the visual field. So suppose this is my right eye. The rays of light which are coming from this temporal aspect, they fall onto the nasal retina. Okay. So here you see the rays of light coming from the temporal aspect are falling on the nasal retina because light follows a straight path. Similarly, the rays of light coming from the nasal part, that is from here, they come and fall on the temporal retina. Okay. So here you see the rays of light coming from the nasal retina are falling on the temporal retina. So this concept is very important. So whatever the rays of light are coming from a temporal aspect, they fall on my nose. And whatever rays are coming from this medial aspect, from this nose part, they fall on this side. So this is how they cross. So rays of light from the outer aspect fall on the nasal retina, and rays of light from the nasal part, the nasal visual field, fall on the temporal retina. Okay. Similarly, the superior part. So whatever rays of light are coming from the superior part, they fall on the inferior part of my eyeball. Similarly, the rays of light coming from the inferior part of the visual field, they fall on the superior part of my eyeball. All this is happening because light follows a straight path. Okay. So any rays of light coming from inferiorly, they fall on the superior part of the retina. Rays of light coming from the superior part of retina fall on the superior part of visual field, fall on the inferior part of retina. Rays of light coming from the temporal aspect fall on the nasal part of retina. Rays of light coming from the nasal part fall on the temporal part of retina. So here if you see in this right eye, the rays of light coming from temporal part fall on this nasal retina. The rays of light coming from the nasal field fall on the temporal retina. The same thing happens for here also. Similarly, the superior field, whatever the superior fibers are coming, superior vision lights, rays of light fall on the inferior retina. Inferior rays fall on the superior retina. I hope you are all clear with this. If any doubts, I'll explain it to you again. Okay. Any doubts, please type in the chat box. Because without knowing that concept, you can't proceed further. So you just remember that light follows a straight path. So when the light is traveling straight, the rays of light which are falling from the outer, from the temporal part fall on the nasal retina. Rays of light coming from the medial aspect fall on the temporal retina. Rays of light coming from inferior part on the superior retina. Rays of light coming from superior fall on the inferior retina. So that part you remember. Okay. So now coming to the lesions of this visual pathway. So the lesions of this visual pathway can be at various levels. So in your diagram, in your textbook, I think this junctional scotoma diagram is given wrongly. So better you take care of that once because it is given wrong in that. So you see whether it is correct or not. So lesions of this visual pathway. So here you see, here again the same thing is explained here. So this is the visual field. Okay. This is the right eye. This is the left eye. So this is the visual field of this patient. This is the right eye's visual field and this is the left eye's visual field. Okay. This red color indicates the temporal field of this right eye. Okay. So this red color is the temporal part. So rays of light coming from here fall on the nasal retina. I hope you are clear now. You are able to understand. So the rays of light coming from the temporal aspect, they come and fall on the nasal retina. Okay, that is one thing. And similarly, the rays of light which are coming from the nasal half, they come and fall on this temporal retina, temporal half of retina. That thing you are clear. The same thing happens for the other eye. Now, what are the various possible areas of this lesion? So see, first thing is optic nerve is completely damaged. Number one, optic nerve is completely damaged. So when you cut the optic nerve here, this eye is totally blind because there is no amount of impulse going from this optic nerve to the brain. Okay. So when there is a completely avulsion of this optic nerve, or completely there is a cutting of this optic nerve here, what happens is there are no more impulses of vision going from this eye to the cerebral hemisphere. So when this optic nerve is cut at this part, this eye is totally blind. The other eye is normal, so other eye will be normally seen. The other eye vision will be normal, only this eye is totally gone. So that is the first part, where the optic nerve is cut. Okay. And then the second thing is the junctional scotoma. So junctional scotoma is here, von Willebrand's. I have already explained you. So in junctional scotoma, when you are cutting here, what happens is this eye completely vision is gone. So here completely this fibers coming from this optic nerve are gone. So this eye is totally blind here. In case of junctional scotoma, this eye is totally blind. And in other eye, what happens is the infranasal fibers take a bend here. So as the infranasal fibers are gone, so what I told you, the nasal fibers subserve the temporal part of visual field. So where should be the defect? The defect should be in the temporal half. Okay, temporal half. And second thing is I told you infranasal fibers. What I told you, inferior fibers receive light from the superior aspect of the visual field. So finally here infranasal fibers are affected. So infranasal fibers get the vision from the superior temporal part of the visual field. That's why you get a superior temporal scotoma here. Okay, hope you are clear. So in case of von Willebrand's lesion or junctional scotoma, there is an aversion of the optic nerve here. So this eye will be totally blind like this, and the other eye, as only the infranasal fibers which bend here are damaged, you get a superior temporal scotoma. Infranasal fibers have a vision of the superior temporal aspect of the visual field. That's where superior temporal scotoma is called. So this type of a combination is known as a junctional scotoma. One eye is blind, other eye has got a superior temporal visual field defect. So whenever a patient says on visual field that I am unable to see in one eye completely and the other eye is totally normal, you can say that there is some damage to this optic nerve. Similarly, patient says I am totally blind in one eye, in other eye only this part I am not able to see, the rest 3 quadrants I am able to see. Then your diagnosis will be some lesion in this von Willebrand's. It could be a tumor, or it could be a trauma, or it could be a hemorrhage, or it could be aneurysm, or parasitic cyst, or something, whatever it is. Okay. So the next thing, third one. So third one lesion, you see here it is in this optic chiasma, in the center of this optic chiasma. So in the center of the optic chiasma, what is happening? Only the nasal fibers of the retina are present. So what I told in optic chiasma, the nasal fibers cross over, whereas the temporal fibers do not cross. So here you see only the nasal fibers are crossing, this red and blue, whereas the temporal fibers are uncrossed. So when the nasal fibers are crossed, so when the nasal fibers, what they subset, they look at the temporal field of the vision, because the temporal light comes and falls on the nasal part of the retina. As a result, the nasal fibers see the temporal outer half of the vision. So when the nasal fibers of both eyes are gone, you can see a scotoma in this temporal part. So the patient, what he says is, I can see everything what is located in front of me, but whenever I am driving a bike, I can't see who is overtaking me. Suppose a patient is having a lesion in this part of the optic chiasma, center of the optic chiasma, and suppose he's driving a bike. So what the typical complaint of the patient will be, I'm able to see the road straightly, but I am unable to see any bike or a lorry which is coming from my side. So then what you have to suspect is, you have to suspect that there is some lesion in the center of the optic chiasma. That's why in optic chiasma, as the nasal fibers are gone, the nasal fibers look at the temporal part of the visual field. So both sides temporal visual field is gone. So you get this kind of a visual field defect. Temporal part of vision is gone. This is known as homonymous hemianopia. So hemianopia, anopia means loss of vision. Anopia means loss of vision. Hemianopia means half of the vision is lost, and it is homonymous. Homonymous because both sides temporal is gone. Both sides temporal vision is gone, so it is called homonymous hemianopia. Okay. Similarly, suppose the vision, and what are the causes for the lesion in this middle part? So I told you optic chiasma is located over the pituitary gland. So any tumors of the pituitary gland or any craniopharyngioma coming from the superior sphenoid sinus or whatever it is. So any craniopharyngioma or else any tumors of the pituitary gland, they can cause a compression of optic chiasma and they cause a homonymous hemianopia bitemporal. Okay. Similarly, optic chiasma, in this part there might be a lesion. Suppose there's an internal carotid artery is located on either sides of this optic chiasma. Suppose the internal carotid artery has got an aneurysm, as I told you in that case. So internal carotid artery is compressing this optic chiasma in this lateral aspect. So now what happens? Only the temporal fibers will be gone. See in this number 4, only the temporal half of the retina is gone. Okay. So when the temporal half of optic nerve is gone, what I told you, the temporal fibers take impulses from the nasal half of the retina. So here see the nasal half of the visual field go to the temporal fibers. So what kind of a visual field effect is opposite of the above? That is, the nasal field is gone. So here what the patient says is, when I'm looking straight, or whatever is present be inside or in front of me, I'm unable to see. What are present at the periphery, I'm able to see. So that is the patient's complaint. And this is also homonymous because both nasal visual field is affected. It is a homonymous. Homonymous because both side nasal part is affected. Nasal part of visual field affected. So it is a homonymous binasal hemianopia. That is what you see in optic chiasma. Okay. And the next one is optic tract. So optic tract is here, 5, 6, and 7. So optic tract or this lateral geniculate body or whatever, here you see, here what happens is, there are temporal fibers of the same eye and nasal fibers of the other eye. So one eye temporal fibers are gone. Suppose this side temporal fibers are gone. So this side nasal field defect and this side nasal fibers are gone. So temporal field defect. So there is a heteronymous hemianopia. So here also it is a hemianopia. Half of the vision is only seen. Hemianopia. But this is heteronymous. Heteronymous because one side temporal and other side nasal. Or one side nasal and other side temporal, it is affected. Okay, that is about one more thing. And it's 8, 9, and 10. So this 8, 9 is lesions in the temporal lobe. So lesions in the temporal lobe. So what happens is this optic radiations, what I told you. So optic nerve, optic chiasma, optic tract, and lateral genital body, and optic radiations. This is the visual pathway. So in optic radiation, what happens is there's optic radiations pass to the temporal lobe and the parietal lobe. Okay, fibers of this optic radiation, they pass to the temporal lobe as well as the parietal lobe. Now you see temporal lobe is located inferiorly and parietal lobe is located superiorly. Okay, what I told you, the superior visual field is obstructed by the inferior half of the retina, and inferior half of the retina is obstructed by the superior half of the retina. So the same arrangement goes on even this optic radiation also. Those inferior retina fibers lie inferiorly, that is in the temporal lobe, and the superior retina fibers lie in the superior part, that is the parietal lobe. So whenever there is a lesion in the temporal lobe, so this number 8 corresponds to the temporal lobe lesion. So temporal lobe is present inferiorly and parietal lobe is present superiorly. Temporal lobe carries fibers from the inferior retina and parietal lobe carries fibers from the superior retina. So when the temporal lobe is gone, so the inferior fibers of the retina are gone. When the inferior fibers of retina are gone, you get a superior visual field defect. So that's why you get a superior visual field defect. And that too, here the entire superior visual field is not gone. Okay, because the other eye, the vision will be normal here. Okay, because here you see only in this optic radiation, what happens is you get only this kind of a hemianopia you get. From this optic tract onwards, what happens is optic tract, you have nasal fibers of the opposite side and temporal fibers of the same side. So you get a heteronymous hemianopia, that is one nasal and one temporal fiber hemianopia you get from all the lesions above this optic tract, whether it is optic tract or lateral genital body or optic radiation or occipital cortex. So there is a heteronymous hemianopia. In heteronymous hemianopia, here what happens is all the fibers are gone. That's why you get a total upper quadrant and lower quadrant, superior and inferior fibers, everything is gone when you cut this optic tract here. But here what happens is in temporal lobe, only the inferior fibers are present. That's why only superior visual field defect you get. Similarly, in parietal lobe, only the superior fibers are present. That's why you get only inferior field defect. And inferior field defect, that's why you get in this heteronymous form. Okay, once you read it again, you'll be clear about that. Okay. And similarly, number 10. Number 10, it is in the 10 is again the optic radiation. Similarly, if the entire optic radiation is gone, suppose parietal lobe and temporal lobe, they finally converge into the occipital cortex. Suppose while they are converging, the parietal lobe consists of the superior fibers. So suppose you think that this 10 is nothing but it is a combination of 8 and 9. Okay, when it is a combination of 8 and 9, in this 8 there are fibers from this temporal lobe, and this 9 there are fibers from the parietal lobe. Now both of them join together and they enter the occipital cortex. So just in front of the occipital cortex, if there is a damage, so what happens is there is a damage to this temporal lobe fibers and the parietal lobe fibers. So what happens is there is a visual defect in both in the upper part as well as the lower part. So these two lesions club together and form this lesion number 10. Okay, that is how it is. And suppose tip of the occipital cortex infarct is there. Suppose only tip is affected. The tip of occipital cortex has got the macular fibers. I told you the macular fibers are present at the center of the optic nerve. The fibers from the optic nerve, from the macula, present in the center of the optic nerve, and the tip of the occipital cortex has got the fibers from the macula. So when there is an injury, like a bullet injury or a gunshot injury to the tip of the occipital cortex, or there's an infarct, only the macula, that is only the central vision is gone, but the peripheral vision is good here. Okay, so these are the various lesions of visual pathway. This is a little confusing. Just remember the concept that temporal light comes from the nasal retina, nasal light comes to the temporal retina, superior light comes to the inferior retina, inferior retina comes to the superior retina, and macular fibers stay at the center. If that point you remember, it is enough. And this pie in the sky. This is called pie in the sky because it is present superiorly. So when the patient is looking up, when he is looking towards the sky, he gets a visual field defect. It is called a pie in the sky. It is seen in case of temporal lobe defects. And this is called pie in the floor. When the patient is looking down, he gets a visual field defect. So it is seen in lesions of the parietal lobe. Okay. So these are the various lesions. Okay. Here we will stop it here. So the same thing in next class, we'll see the pupillary reflexes. And after that, we'll go for the diseases of the optic nerve proper. Okay. Any doubts you have till now? Better you have to read it again. Unless you read it, it is little confusing, especially the lesions of visual pathway. It is important for PG entrance point of view also. They'll ask you various questions. So if suppose there is a lesion, this von Willebrand, what type of a scotoma you get. So they will ask you a question like, there's a pie in the sky, where is the lesion? Or they'll ask you, homonymous bitemporal hemianopia, where is the lesion? You should say it is in the optic chiasma center. So what could be the lesion? What could be the cause? options they'll give you pituitary tumor or genital carotid artery aneurysm. You should say pituitary tumor. So like that, from this many questions can be framed. So that is very important for you. So basic concept what you have to remember is the light from the temporal half goes to the nasal retina, nasal half goes to temporal retina, superior goes to inferior, and inferior goes to superior. And temporal lobe, it is present inferiorly, parietal lobe is present superiorly. So temporal lobe carries fibers from the inferior retina and parietal lobe carries fibers from the superior retina. And macular fibers are present at the center and they go to the tip of the occipital cortex. So I think this is enough for today. So any doubts you have till now? Any doubts you can ask. Read it once for today. Tomorrow we'll go for the other things, pupillary reflexes and all, and we'll see what it is. Unless you read it 2 times or 3 times, it is a little difficult to understand. Okay, any doubts? Okay, then we'll end it here. We'll continue in next class. Okay.